Hello and welcome to the Entrepreneurial Journey podcast. Today I'm delighted to have Tim Allen CBE with me. He is a serial entrepreneur, a philanthropist and chair of the V&A Museum in Dundee. Hello Tim, how are you?
Very good, Rebecca. Good morning to you. I'm very well, thanks.
The Entrepreneurial Journey podcast. We're talking business and building a culture that's kick-ass. Where we make it happen, grab your seat, let's have a blast. At the Entrepreneurial Journey podcast.
Now, your CBE, tell our listeners what you were awarded the CBE for.
I was awarded the CBE by the King, and it was for business, charity, and the arts. So there's a broad spectrum for you, and that pretty much sums up where my interests currently lie. Was in business, and business success allows you the opportunity to support things in charity, in a philanthropic fashion, and in particular in the artistic and design environment.
Cool. Right, let's start with business.
Yeah.
So, what are you known for in business?
I was a pretty conventional kid, went to Sandhurst University. I then did 10 years in the army where I was an army officer, and I served on tanks. So I am qualified tank commander. And I finished with a stint working at Buckingham Palace, which took off some of my rough edges and gave me some insight into the world. I think it's actually, what was that song by James? If I hadn't seen such riches, I could live with being poor. Oh. I think I realized there was a huge opportunity in the world beyond the armed forces. So at age 32, I left with my young family, and I went into private banking. And in private banking, I got to meet many entrepreneurs, really major people. And that was phenomenal experience because you're meeting some incredibly inspiring folk in that process. And I was lucky to work on the Entrepreneur of the Year program back at the end of the 90s. And that I got to meet people like Tom Hunter, Tom Farmer, Alistair Locke, these great, Jim McCall, these great titans of Scottish business who had breadth of vision across the country, across the world, in fact.
Yeah, they did.
And that made me realize, in fact, there were huge opportunities out there for myself if you could identify the winning formula you wanted. So banking gave me that foundation and inspiration to find my way in business. And that's when I got together with some friends. We bought the Dundee waterfront. We developed that, built relationships. It was kind of successful. It was hit by a financial crash in 2008, 2009.
I remember it well.
Oh, we do. We're still suffering from those.
Yeah, we are.
So we started in 2006. We kept going to 16, 17, at which stage we were able to wrap it up what we'd done, which is great. We had helped rejuvenate the Dundee waterfront.
Yeah, yeah.
But by that stage, my business had moved on to petrol forecourts, petrol retailing. Myself and some colleagues had set up a business called Motor Fuel Group. We started with 47 forecourts across the UK. We bought a failing business. We built it up. We bought institutional discipline, real structure and focus to it. Traditionally a fragmented sector crying out for consolidation. And we saw that opportunity. And that business, I'm pleased to say now, turns over about 5 billion. It's the UK's biggest forecourt operator and the biggest and fastest adapter to electric vehicle charging.
Wow.
So a huge retail business. And that huge retail business gives you phenomenal insights into how the UK economy functions. And finally, from that, the success there allowed me to be philanthropic. That allows me to become an investor in early stage Scottish companies, because I'm a great believer that and this was a mantra that guys like Tom Hunter had, which is you have to put it back. You can't take it out, you've got to put it back. Because wealth creation is a virtue, and sharing that wealth is an even greater virtue. And that gives me phenomenal pleasure.
So when you were a tank commander, did you ever think that you'd be where you are now?
No, I thought when I was a young tank commander, I thought I wanted to be a general.
Right.
And I loved it. But I kind of realized that having an abiding interest and affection for army and soldiers doesn't necessarily make you a soldier. And when my children came along and I was working in a civilian capacity, essentially, at Buckingham Palace, I realized that I didn't want to go back to hiding behind dustbins in West Belfast or witnessing the tragedies in Bosnia and Sarajevo, that part of the world, which was happening at that time. And I realized that actually I had perhaps grown past the army. So did I ever see myself going into business? No, I just, as a young dad, wanted to find something which I could enjoy and provide for my family. In private banking, when I went for an interview, the headhunter managed to get me in to see Citibank's private bank in Berkeley Square. And I never looked back. I loved it. They were a phenomenal organization with a real dedication to training. And that was hugely important for me.
So in business now, your own businesses, have you used any of your military training in that arena?
Yeah, there is. I mean, because the military is brilliant. Guys from the armed forces are really outstanding employees because they have that work ethic and that discipline. And everyone says to you, we got a rigid mindset. And I remember when I was doing my job interviews, when I was leaving, I was interviewed by Anderson Consulting in those days, Accenture. Yep. And they put me, my final interview with them was a pretty punchy senior partner who said, the problem with you guys in the army, you've all got rigid mindsets and you've got so little experience of the world. And I said to him, well, that is, at that stage I knew I had a Citibank job, so I decided to be very feisty. I said, well, I've changed roles 7 times in the last 10 years. And I have served in 5 different countries, 2 different war zones, and run independent missions in Africa on separate occasions. Now, you've been a management consultant and an accountant, and that's what you've done for 20 years. So who's the one who's limited? And I said to them, actually, and by the way, you can stick this job. But the next guy who comes in from the armed forces realize that they have more breadth of experience, especially the generation coming through now with the Balkans. The next day, the headhunter rang to say that they were desperate to get me on the line to give me the job. But by that stage, I accepted the job from Citibank and obviously couldn't go back. But armed forces guys, and now increasingly, of course, it's men and women, armed forces personnel have the most extraordinary ability to adapt. Yeah. And they bring their skills and discipline to every single environment. Yeah. And it's that standards, it's the application of standards and the willingness to and attention to detail, which is really strong. And I think the thing they lack is they lack self-belief and confidence in themselves in a civilian environment. I've always said that when I worked for a couple of private banks, one of those I worked for, I always said, if you'd put my battle group headquarters I served in 1994, if you put that battle group headquarters in charge of that bank, I think we've doubled profits in 2 years. I mean, the quality of management and leadership I find in the civilian world constantly surprises me on the downside.
Yes, I'm a coach and I would agree with you. I've worked in some really huge global institutions and coached some very, very senior people. And whilst, superb at their jobs, their leadership ability, very, very poor. They're not taught how to lead.
No.
And even people that have been on fancy leadership programs didn't get the nuances of leadership or the flexibility of behavior required and things like that. And I was thinking, how do you not know this? How have you got to this very senior role and not know this? Conversely, go on. I recruited...
Because leadership isn't taught.
No, it's not.
In the business world.
It's not. And I still to this, it's seen as a luxury, as a soft skill. And it's absolutely crazy. Conversely, I did recruit our ex-army people when I worked at British Rail way back. Fantastic. But they were all guys. They were from the engineering bit of the army. Absolutely fantastic. And ever since then, like you, I've rated ex-service personnel.
Well, going back to your key point there, which is about the failure of leadership at the civilian level, I absolutely see it all the time. My commanding officer, Peter Gilchrist, who then went on to become a general, he was superb. And every Monday morning, and every Friday afternoon, he toured the camp, took the time to the camp as commanding officer, responsible for 600 soldiers and their families and supporting arms in the, fairly decent-sized SME, so to speak. And he walked around it and spoke to people. He knew what the workers on the shop floor, in effect, were doing. Yeah. He knew how they felt. He knew their grumbles. He knew about their families. And also he could gauge the state of morale and the state of discipline in different years, different squadrons or troops, depending on the condition of the area. If it was slack, it was messy. So he'd then be able to bring in, during the next week, conversations with the officers concerned, saying, how are you getting on? What's going on there? Happened to see that your squadron area was in a terrible state. What was the reason for that? And then but also the mentoring and the encouraging, and that is just something I never saw in financial services.
Yeah.
The management team never left their boxes and to come and walk the floor and talk to the people doing the work.
Yeah.
And I think that simple human touch is critical in any business. And the entrepreneurs out there on your podcast listen to this, they know that unless they're in touch all the time with the people on the ground, they don't know what's happening in their business.
Absolutely. I noticed Zoom, of all people, have insisted that their office workers come back 2 days a week.
Yeah.
How ironic is that?
But I mean, don't you think that's completely overblown? Sort of,
yeah.
The hybrid working concept is one there's a huge conceit to it.
Yeah.
Because young people need to be in groups to learn by that professional osmosis that takes place around the desk space.
Yeah, absolutely.
To feel part of something, to feel included, rather than at home in your pajamas, eating toast, going to Zoom meetings.
Yeah, I know, that's no fun. Right, tell me about your philanthropic work.
So it was a very profound installation in me by the entrepreneurial sector in Scotland, is that you couldn't take, you had to give back.
Right.
And that was really, really strong ethos in Scotland in the 90s. So it's always been my role. I got involved with Young Enterprise Scotland. Of course.
Oh, yeah, I love them.
You and I met, and we were on the board of Young Enterprise Scotland. I became the chair of Young Enterprise Scotland. I loved it. It was very challenging because, as you will recall, the board, we had one role, but then there was a council and all that sort of stuff. And there were a lot of personalities involved, and the structure wasn't right. So you have to restructure that charity. But I love the fact that you're making a difference. And the most important, I mean, the thing we did at Young Enterprise Scotland back in the 2000s was we reached out from schools where we traditionally had been operating into prisons and hard to reach.
I did not know that.
Yeah. So the impact we made in prisons like Polmont and Cornton Vale and so forth, working with young offenders, was significantly greater than any, business competition that a school runs. That has its role, that has its purpose. But actually, there was a transformational process that we went through working in hard-to-reach areas, and that was something I was really proud of. And it was for that I got the Queen's Award for Enterprise for my work there. And then I've always then had, during that time, I was appointed to the board of the big lottery in Scotland because I was the wild card business person entering the third sector. And I loved that. That was a really important time in my life. I had 7 years on the board of the big lottery. It was really important to me because I went in as a very unthinking, virtual libertarian free marketeer, believing that the market is perfect and everybody who didn't get that was going to fail. And I realized, of course, that whilst much of what Margaret Thatcher did for me made sense, ultimately it failed because the communities were destroyed in that process. Mm-hmm. And that neglect of the communities, the post-industrial landscape, was shocking for me. So I decided that it was a good learning curve. The big lottery were working with wonderful people, and I was in awe of them. It helped me a lot shape my worldview thereafter. So then I was lucky that, so when you have business success, you can use, one of the greatest pleasures is being able to find something clever, something good, something that makes a change, and investing in it. Now, I don't regard donations as donations, they're investments. So, for example, one of the things that inspired me in Dundee, because Dundee is a very challenged city, it's doing a fantastic job of changing its whole mindset and its whole destination. But there was a lady there, Angie DeVos. She ran the wonderful Aspiring Women program.
Yes.
And I funded that program for a few years until eventually it ran its course and the Scottish government wouldn't fund it to the sustainable level needed to go to, which I thought was tragic because, again, really, it brought women who felt out with the mainstream. It brought them back into a community, which allowed them to become enterprising and entrepreneurial in their own way. Not like they're going to start a new super enterprise, a unicorn, but they were able to actually get positive outcomes themselves in their lives, whether that was standing up to a partner, whether it was standing up to your children, whether it was actually becoming a leader in their community or their street or their block of flats. It was fantastic. And I think that is the great pleasure of having money, is your ability to reinvest in communities, because ultimately, if we reinvest in our communities, we're going to end up with a healthier, wealthier, happier bunch of citizens.
Completely.
Who then become better customers, if you're being really cynical about it, in the long term.
Just better human beings, I think. I think community is everything. And I completely agree with you on the Thatcher piece, is that, she did a lot that has enabled us to be economically successful, the destruction of communities, we still haven't recovered from that.
No.
And I think, without getting overly political, although we may spill over into that, actually, if we're going to have a really good government, we need a government who focuses on nourishing communities.
Yes.
Because I personally think that feeds into the sustainability agenda. I think it feeds into the health agenda, the well-being agenda, as well as the economic agenda, that actually investing in communities is where it all starts. Yeah. And you look after that and everything else will take care of itself.
And that's, it can't be the magic wand solution of our policymakers tend to have the next new thing. Mm-hmm. Actually, I'm afraid to say, tackling poverty and tackling communities under pressure takes a very holistic approach. As it's got to be from the grassroots upwards. You're going to be working with everybody's well-being on a very grassroots basis. Yeah. And then you build on those foundations. This top-down approach you so often see coming in doesn't work. You have, and that means that if you are working with a challenged community, you've got to be mentoring and helping the parents, the caregivers, as well as nurturing the kids in the school. Yep. And I remember Dundee, one headmistress in Dundee, saying to me that attainment to her wasn't how many higher passes she got, it was how many children came back to school after the October break.
Yes. Yeah.
And she had kids who went to school carrying their pajamas and a toothbrush in their rucksack because they didn't know to which home they were going to go to at the end of each day. Now, that's a situation we've got to stop.
Yeah.
We have to address that, because if kids don't have that continuity and consistency of approach and affection and a nurturing environment, we're not going to create citizens of the future who can sustain it and do it for the next generation.
Exactly.
So multi-generational poverty is one of the greatest curses of this country. And we need to somehow deal with that, and the worklessness that goes alongside it.
Yeah, we do, definitely. So the arts, okay, so the chair of the V&A Dundee, which is fabulous. How did you land that job?
I obviously, working Dundee's waterfront and developing the waterfront, we got to know it well. I was involved in the project for 10 years up to its opening in 2018. I became the vice chair of the fundraising campaign. It was the biggest fundraising campaign for capital ever done in Scotland. And we raised 15 million for the capital city building. And I could see, very early on, I was completely unconvinced this would even begin to happen. Lovely idea, but who could imagine the V&A being built in Dundee? Well, here we are. Imagine on. And it has been utterly transformational. So I was brought onto the board in 2018, and the chair came available in 2019, and I applied for that. And I managed to persuade colleagues that because the job was unfinished. If we go back to military terms, we had landed on the beach.
Right.
But we hadn't got off the beach.
Okay.
And actually, the people who get you onto the beach and the people who get you off the beach, and then the people who exploit it beyond the beach head are different. Very often, different commanders get different jobs because they have different skill sets. So the first team at the V&A got us unbelievably, made this happen and got it built. Then I became the new chair. I appointed a new director, and we are now getting off the beach. I just love it because it's a catalyst for regeneration like nothing else. And it's hard now to imagine City of Dundee without the V&A.
Yeah, absolutely.
10 years ago, we thought it would never happen. And now It's driving economic regeneration in the city and changing perceptions of what the city's like. But, of course, it's the cultural sector in Scotland suffers from multi-year underfunding from government. And that is an issue, I think, across the whole world, is that people don't realise, governments, policymakers don't realise how important culture and the arts are for national morale and well-being for so little cost, for so little money. Anyway, there we are.
No, so I think it's the work you've done there is fantastic. And we were just talking before the interview that the Tartan exhibition has been voted one of the best exhibitions in the UK.
Yeah, it is. I mean, we would argue strongly that the Tartan exhibition this year is the most important exhibition in the UK this summer.
Fabulous.
It runs the end of January for those who haven't seen it. It is outstanding. The best thing we've done, and it's the first thing that the museum has curated itself.
Right.
Normal, it's a young museum. We've been a receiving house. We've taken exhibitions. We adapt them for ourselves, but they're pretty much co-curated or curated by others. This one we curated, and I hope very much we're going to be able to tour it around the world because the demand around the world. We were out in Tartan Week in April that we really took it to America to show what it could be like in that wonderful Tartan Day parade.
Yeah.
And the Americans said, "You've got to come, bring it to New York." So,
Fabulous.
Yeah,
I'll look out for that. Yeah, that's amazing. Yeah, no, I will visit September, October. I'll come up to Dundee I'll visit and have a coffee with you. That'd be nice.
Good. Let me know.
Yeah, we'll do. Okay, so you were president of was it the Scottish Chamber of Commerce?
Chamber of Commerce, yeah. I was president 5 years covering the pandemic as well.
Yeah. What was that like?
Well, I think that was extraordinary. We all know how extraordinary it was. The response to the pandemic is still open to debate, and of course, there's a huge inquiry going to the moment.
Yeah.
And I hope that we learn our lessons from that about what works and what doesn't work.
Yeah.
What depressed me during that process was policymakers and politicians' views across the country were closed to the input from business.
Yeah.
They were essentially didn't listen.
Yeah.
And they essentially didn't concentrate on what was working, what the data was telling them. We knew pretty much by the end of summer of 2020 that the risk of transmission or damaging transmission in the hospitality environment was nowhere near what the models had been projected.
Yeah.
And you remember these health models by people like Neil Ferguson and so forth have historically always been wrong.
Always wrong.
And the politicians, Boris lost his nerve, and the First Minister took a very draconian view on it and decided to gild every lily that came from England. So if England wasn't going to allow alcohol after 10 at night, we wouldn't allow it after 8 at night. Now, nobody was ever able to explain to him why a restaurant could serve wine indoors till 6 o'clock, not till 10 o'clock, but they could serve it outdoors till 8 o'clock. Arbitrary numbers. And actually, from my experience of constant lobbying and constant interaction with ministers and civil servants at that time was, these were numbers being plucked out of the sky by people who didn't know and were unwilling to listen to evidence from elsewhere. And I found that whole process for me, this was one's moment to fight the battle. I chose to fight that battle. And I think we, by and large, made little difference because we had policymakers who wouldn't listen.
Yeah.
But at least what it was the voice, this is back to the leadership point, is if the sector was able to hear somebody expressing their concerns and their fears at the highest level, it was a means of which could help maintain morale. Because it's that sense of powerlessness, that sense of being at sea, shut down, unable to operate. The terror of a small business just closed, hemorrhaging money away with so little relief was palpable. And they had to get some sense that somebody was standing up for them. I'm just only sorry that we couldn't be more effective at changing the First Minister's mind on anything.
Well, I've known you for a long time, Tim. And I saw your posts on LinkedIn and I thought, well, here's somebody in a position of power who is actually speaking up and speaking out for businesses. And you were one of the few people who are doing that in Scotland. I actually felt very betrayed by most of the Scottish business community during that time because there was very little vocalized for us. But you were one of the few people who were brave enough to do that. And I thank you for that.
Well, Rebecca, thank you. And it's I can't say so. But the problem was, if you're a big corporate Scotland, if you're a big corporate anywhere, you just take the furlough money if required, or you send everyone home to Zoom.
Yeah.
And by and large, the service industry could carry on the way it was. The real terror was the people with the SMEs, which couldn't get their cafe open, couldn't get their nail bar open, couldn't get, for reasons which nobody was clear about. And of course, the worst of all, the closing of the schools. I mean, the closing of the schools and the treatment of education in the country as a whole was a disgrace. We must remember never to do that again.
Yes.
Cause multi-generational developmental issues amongst young people.
Yeah.
And we all talk about the tsunami of mental health issues amongst the young. Well, go figure.
Yeah, absolutely.
Anyway, don't get me started.
No. Well, same here. But the closing of the schools is something I will never forgive the politicians for, ever. Yeah, it was appalling. Anyway, we move on to more positive things. So, okay, we're in this post-Brexit world, all right, which has been interesting for all kinds of reasons. I mean, for us as a business, it means we've looked up and out. So we're expanding in the UAE and the USA, which is great, and beyond. We didn't even bother looking at Europe. But for other businesses, it's been a complete disaster. If you were in charge, what would you do, Tim?
Well, it's an interesting one because at Scottish Chambers of Commerce, we were asked to look at the markets beyond and to improve Scotland's, frankly, very poor exporting record. What's really important is to realise that 70% of Scotland's exports go to England.
Indeed, they do.
And we have literally so little representation in India and Southeast Asia. So we looked at that. We did I did 3 trade missions to China and 1 to India, and you realize how incredibly difficult it is to do business when you're an SME.
Yeah.
In any country, let alone ones with profoundly different business cultures. And you'll know this from trying to work in the Middle East.
Yeah.
So actually, I would focus on doing better with the rest of the UK.
Right.
And also those European countries which we sadly now lost our advantages with them through Brexit, but we must try and somehow rebuild those bridges in any way we can. I was clearly somebody who supported remaining in the EU, and I then became somebody who was, people have spoken. I'm not sure necessarily had now. Now we understand better manipulation and voting, but never mind. So I became a born-again Brexiteer. Right, let's get on with it. I had hoped that our Brexit campaigners had a vision they were going to implement to make us that really high-powered. And then you realize that nobody had a plan.
No.
And I find that really profoundly depressing. Again, it erodes trust in politicians.
Yeah.
So we should be focusing very much, as Scotland right now, what Scotland should be focusing on is our own phenomenal educational assets, the great quality that comes out of our universities in the shape of technology and research. That is proven to be very attractive to American and foreign investors.
Okay.
I've had 2 exits in the last 18 months where 2 companies I've invested in, technology businesses in Scotland, have been bought by American and American-Israeli businesses because it's cheap. Because Britain... So Scotland has great assets to offer. It has great people to offer, a very skilled workforce. And our biggest market is the market in England. We should be competing more with the rest of, and selling more into the rest of the UK, whilst trying to regain our European markets. I do think, from an SME perspective, the ambitions, long-haul ambitions, are quite very, very difficult unless you've got something that people want to buy, like whiskey or magnificent salmon. Those kind of exports, foreign countries will all want the luxury good, and they're willing to pay. But if you're trying to, do traditional SME manufacturing or services abroad, very, very, very difficult outside proper legal jurisdictions where the business model is by and large something you can recognize. I don't know if that's really helpful. But the point I'd like to go back to there is about investment and the potential companies that come out of Scotland. I mean, I remember the Archangels in Edinburgh, which is the oldest investment syndicate in the UK. I think one of the oldest in the world. And we invest in about, I think portfolio is probably about 16, 18 companies at the moment. And they all have to be clever, Scottish, early stage Scottish technology or life sciences businesses with defendable IP. So it's quite specific. And they are very patient capital. They take long horizons, which is important in the venture capital world. And yet we have so many great people doing great stuff. And we constantly find American and European buyers floating around, looking at how they can get us. Because one of the things that Britain doesn't do right is we don't value our technology properly. So in America, they often, a tech company which is doing well will be 20, 30 times its revenue or something like that. In Scotland, it'll be a fraction of that. So the Americans think, well, actually, I can just buy that technology off the shelf from this Scottish company, bolt it on, and it's cheap.
Why don't we value it properly?
I don't know. It's a big problem in City London as well. I mean,
I was hearing that on the radio this morning. Yeah.
The stock exchange in London is proving to be less attractive to foreign, flotations or listings because, or even our own domestic listings.
Yeah.
Because our investment community doesn't value up the technology that the Americans do. Now, maybe the Americans overvalue it. Or maybe they just understand it better because it is the most vibrant technology community in the world. And I'm sure there are technology investors who tell you, or specialists who will tell you explain better than I can. I'm able to see that they find us very inexpensive. And that has its advantages if you're looking for an exit, but maybe we should be looking less for the exit. And of course, that leads to the question of scaling up, which remains a perpetual UK and Scottish problem.
Yeah, it does. I don't understand why we find it so hard to scale our businesses. I just don't get that because we have the skills, we have the ability. Is it confidence, do you think? Lack of confidence?
Tom Hunter used to describe it as the difference between a merchant and an entrepreneur. Entrepreneurs want to constantly be driving forward to find the maximum value they can get. And the worst thing that can happen to an entrepreneur is to have some success. Because you two said nothing, ambition bites the nails at success. And the problem with the Brits is, I think, is when they make a bit of money, they immediately want to go and pay off the mortgage, get a bigger house, put the kids through school, and that gives them comfort. So when somebody at a young stage company offers a young founder, CEO, $3 million for his stake or her stake, and then they can remain as employee of that business, very hard to say no. The British culture has always said, "Oh, well, better bird in the hand, pay off the mortgage, decent holiday." Whilst in America, they want, no. If somebody's willing to pay me 3 now, they'll pay me 30 in 2 years' time.
Yeah.
And I think it's that group think, that cultural thing in America is constantly to see what more you can make. Whilst in Britain, there's a default to the merchant comfort. Once you've got a bit of comfort, then you can relax rather than, I need to keep going on.
So, that's deep in our psyche, isn't it, that?
It is. And I worry about it myself because as soon as you make some money, you become very comfortable. And come longer holidays, better holidays, and then you suddenly realize, no, I am not performing at the level that I should be. So one of the reasons I have diversified in business into philanthropy and to the arts and so forth is to constantly challenge myself. And it's a message for your entrepreneurs out there is if they must feel entrepreneurs by and large need to be stimulated. They've probably got some character defects.
They do. They're constantly bored and fidgety.
They need to be stimulated. And there's no point in doing that with a fast car or a jet ski. It's find a new project and get your teeth into it and see what you can do to make it work. That's why Dundee became a little bit of a passion for me, because we can really change the city. We can really change its destination from a pretty lackluster post-industrial landscape to being one of the most exciting cities in Europe. I think we can do that. And therefore, you need to put your shoulder to that wheel. That stops you getting bored.
It does. I'm going to finish on this question. I could talk to you all day, Tim, and maybe, we should campaign for Tim as Prime Minister. But anyway, if Dundee, I normally ask this about businesses, but I'm going to ask this about Dundee as a city. Dundee had a personality or a character. Who would it be, or how would you describe it?
I think who would it be? Well, that might come out in the description. So Dundee has had a bad time. It's had its glory days in the past, but even the glory days were a bit grungy. So I don't know who that sounds like. And then it went back in this post-war situation. We ended up with industrial decline, mass unemployment, Timex closed, so all the jute factories closed. So by every benchmark, this was a depressed city with highest multiple deprivation. And then I tell you what happened was they reached a nadir in the 80s, and the new council community came through, which basically said, no, we have to stop this, we have to change this. And they took a 30-year plan, not a 5-year plan, a 30-year plan to redesign the city. And they realigned the roads, they knocked down everything, and in a really thoughtful, creative way, decided to become a city of culture and of leisure, and are built around the great universities. So I think we're like Robert Downey Jr.
Okay.
So we're Iron Man. So we had some great days in the early career. Then it all went to ratchet, which involved a lot of drugs in Robert's case, which he talks about freely, and alcohol addiction. And had a very grim time with some pretty poor quality performance. And then he rebooted himself, got himself healthy, got himself clean, got himself in a great relationship. Has become literally this iconic figure in the post-Marvel world, and he's literally seen as Iron Man. I suppose that's what Dundee can do. Dundee can become the Iron Man of British cities, built on our fabulous universities, our great technology sector, and what can be described as extraordinarily resilient people who just need to have the confidence and the jobs which will allow them to reach their potential.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Tim. That was absolutely fantastic. Thoroughly enjoyed it.
Thanks, Rebecca. Speak to you soon.
The Entrepreneurial Journey podcast. We're talking business and building a culture that's